Hands on, feet on, powered on. On your mark. On is the start of everything. On is the key to learning. Being on an environment, not just in it. Being on the world, not just of it.
Tarkett understands how important On is.
We work on it every day. On the ground with you, designing flooring experiences to grow on, dream on, and get on with it.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to present to you this morning our information that we've gathered about the homeless student crisis that we have happening in our country, and it no doubt is impacting students in your districts and in your states. So this morning we're going to have a little bit of a presentation and some discussion about the homeless student crisis. And if we were to have been in person with you today, it would have been a lot more of a panel discussion, but due to the technology that we're going to be working with, we've decided to tailor this more to individual presentations that are all going to flow together for you this morning. And then we will conclude by having some discussion as a group. So as we get started, I'd like to just take a second to let this slide soak in. U.S. News and Report, number of homeless students soar. New York Times, number of homeless students rises. CBS News, more homeless students in the U.S. than in Dallas. BBC News, homeless student population highest than a decade. Gives me chills to read these 1.5 million students. This is a crisis. So I have the pleasure and honor this morning to introduce the three people who will be joining us, all experts in their own right in our industry. We have Alita Sanchez. She is the Social Services Specialist, Homeless Services, for Santa Ana Unified School District. We have Dylan, who is joining us as a student from UCLA Political Sciences, and Sean, lead AP AIA principal with Perkins Eastman, and myself, senior project manager from Brailsford and Dunleavy. And I'd like to give each of them an opportunity to introduce a little bit more about themselves. Alita?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ty, for the presentation. I've been working for Santa Ana Unified for about over a year. Prior to working at Santa Ana Unified, I worked in Long Beach, and I've been working with administrators, teachers, and students, supporting them meet their needs, in particular with students that are experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Dylan?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dylan Oskin, and I am a second-year political science major attending the University of California, Los Angeles. I am a formerly homeless youth as well, and today I've come to share my experience and knowledge of what the experience like was for me growing up as somebody who endured extreme poverty.
Thank you. Sean?
Thanks, Ty. I'm Sean O'Donnell. I lead the Perkins Eastman's national and international school design practice, and I can't say how honored I am to be participating on this panel with Alita, Dylan, and Ty on this incredibly important issue. So thanks, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to hand this over to Dylan so he can share a little bit with us his experience with homelessness as he grew up in California and where it's brought him today. Dylan?
Hi. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my story with you guys today, so that I can provide a little bit of context and emotions to this conversation, because there is a serious crisis going on, and being able to share my perception of of how things are based on the experiences that I had, I think will definitely provide valuable input and provide you with the, emotions needed to carry this conversation. I was originally born myself in Germany, and I migrated to the United States when I was 5 years old. And immediately when we landed in Texas, we ended up in a shelter. And we had stayed at that shelter for probably a year and a half until my mom remarried to my stepfather. And not long after, we relocated to California, more specifically in Orange County. And basically from 7 years old until 15 years old, I lived in motels and lived in shelters, lived with different family members, a few occasions where we slept in our car. It was definitely a very traumatic, extreme, really serious situation that I grew up living in. My parents both suffer from mental health issues, and the environment that they provided to us on top of the fact that we were homeless was very wrong, I will just say. There was a lot of abuse, and it was probably thanks in part because there were 6 of us, in a motel room in a very small quarters. During this time, at one point when we were living at a motel, in one of the pictures that you can see on the PowerPoint slide, my family and I were featured in a documentary called Homeless, the Motel Kids of Orange County, which was filmed by Alexandra Pelosi, and it aired on HBO. And in that documentary, I highly encourage you guys to watch. You can get a very great visual representation of, what my childhood was like in terms of where we were living and what our circumstances were. 15 was a very important age for me because that was the year that I really marked my beginning of independence. My mom, unfortunately, kicked me out, but fortunately for me, it was the best decision she had ever made. And I was finally able to kind of do things on my own. And by age 17 years old, I had my own 1-bedroom apartment. I lived by myself in a 1-bedroom, half of junior year and all of my senior year until I moved to college. And there were a lot of barriers that were presented to me while I was homeless, and there were also a bunch of different barriers that were presented to me after I was kicked out from my parents. Barriers that were presented to me while I was homeless included, having to ration the food that we would eat. We would oftentimes get in trouble if we poured too much cereal because we were hungry or had extra chips with our sandwich for lunch. We were very controlled in what we ate, just simply because we could eat a lot, and my parents didn't have the money to constantly be paying for food. The clothes that we wear oftentimes came from donations. I would go to school and get bullied a lot because of the clothes that I would wear. Oftentimes, there's even a picture you can probably find where I'm wearing a sweater that's longer than my shorts, and it looks like I'm not even wearing any pants. And it looked like I was just wearing, a dress. I don't know. It just, we really didn't have the best time growing up. And then I recognized after I got kicked out, if I wanted to have some sort of success in my life, I needed to educate myself and get myself through school. And so I got myself super involved with high school. I did the International Baccalaureate program at my high school. For those of you who are familiar with that program, I was very honored to be the inaugural class of the IB program. And I started working my freshman year. I was involved in sports and clubs and internships. Graciously enough, I was able to get into Berkeley and into UCLA, and I chose to attend UCLA. And now I am currently studying political science. Along the way, I've been recognized for, sort of the triumph that I have, witnessed, overcoming the poverty that I knew as growing up. And in the PowerPoint slide as well, you can see Orange County Supervisor Andrew Doe presenting me with, congratulations for, I guess, being resilient. And now, what I'm doing with my future, going to school, still trying to figure that out. I know at some point I want to build myself an audience and build a platform and, eventually get into the political sector where, I can help offer my input and perspective just simply because of the way I grew up and the knowledge that I have. And it's kind of sad to say, but there are millions of kids right now who are going through exactly what I went through growing up, and probably there are a lot of kids who went through worse stuff, who are going through more extreme things than what I had to endure. And in the national politics scene, it's kind of scary, and we can see that in the last few years, the increase of percentage of students experiencing homelessness in the United States has increased from ages 3 to 5. It increased 21.2%. The 12th grade increased 22.9%. And Texas's population of homeless students nearly doubled. In the public school enrollment, the students all students enrolled in public schools, it increased 0.5% from 2015 to 2017. While in that same state of time, Texas's population doubled from 115,000 students experiencing homelessness to 231,000. So there was a huge spike in Texas, and we are projecting that that number is going to increase more significantly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are a lot of things that the polls, not the polls, I apologize, the graphs and the data are showing for students who are experiencing homelessness. This next slide here is another map of the United States, and it shows percent change in enrolled homeless students by state from the school years 2015-16 through the 2017 and 18. And in states that are highlighted purple, there was a 9.5% or more increase from students who enrolled as homeless students. So you can obviously see, supported from the graph before in the earliest slide, the last slide, Texas is highlighted purple, Connecticut is highlighted purple, Puerto Rico is highlighted purple because they've all seen a dramatic increase in their homeless population. This slide offers the primary residence of students experiencing homelessness from the 2015-16 school year to the 2017-18 school year. So I want to make sure that I identify what the different colors represent. The orange represents doubled up households, which means that there is one or more families living in a space that is designed for one family. Hotels and motels are gold. Unsheltered, which means living on the streets, is turquoise, and the red is shelter or transitional housing or awaiting foster. So in the 2015-16 school year, the doubled percentage was 75.9%. Hotels were 6.5%, unsheltered 3.3%, and sheltered 14.3%. In 2016 and the 2017 school year, the people who were doubled in housing were 75.8%, 6.6% were living in hotels, 3.7% were living in unsheltered environments, and 13.9% were living in sheltered environments. And in the 2017-2018 school year, 12.1% were living in sheltered environments. Unsheltered environments grew to 6.8%. Hotels were 7.0%, and doubled were 74.1%. So what this tells us is that the majority of our student population that is experiencing homelessness live in doubled up homes, and that is very much represented there in the data. And in hotels and motels, it was pretty consistent throughout the the school years. They're typically very low, but there was a dramatic increase from the 2015-16 school year to the 2017-2018 school year, from 3.3% to 6.8%, which is probably representative of the increased 12th grade student population that are experiencing homelessness. And to break this notion that, you know, the majority of students that are homeless come from non-speaking English background households. This data right here shows otherwise. The 72% of students in the orange from the 2015-2016 to the 2017-2018 were identified as other in terms of their minor status from the National Center for Homeless Education. And other means that those are the students who do come from English-speaking backgrounds. Unaccompanied minors were at 9%. Migrants, typically who don't speak English, are 1% of the population in all 3 school years, and disabled is 18%, which is a very surprising, significant amount of disabled students who are homeless. But it should be fair to note that a majority of the students who are homeless do come from English-speaking backgrounds, and it is very important to dispel any kind of other idea that what's happening is an issue that can be solved by other means, when we should be focusing on what the data supports in reality. In the next slide, we see a map of the United States of the percentage of enrolled homeless students who are unaccompanied youth. So this is the map that represents the unaccompanied youth data, and the purple states represent 14% or more of students who are unaccompanied youth. So you can see in a lot of states like Washington and Oregon and Alaska that there is a very significant population, compared to other states where, you have unaccompanied minors. And we should probably be paying attention to trends that might be, happening in those areas. If I'm thinking of Alaska and, New Mexico, those are not very populated states, which means that there are probably not as many people paying taxes, and it could be less resources. I don't want to spell into why, but that, just to think about what could be causing the increase in unaccompanied youth from a state to another. In the next slide, it is important to point out the graduation rate among students who are experiencing homelessness and poverty as compared to the regular general students who are enrolled in public school. And 65% of those students who are experiencing homelessness graduate with diplomas, and 85% of the general public school population graduates with their high school diplomas. So it is definitely important to note here that the homeless population that are in high school obviously have more pressing barriers that could be affecting the way that they perform in their academics. And so we should be very cautious and be more attentive and aware that students who are identified as homeless should be, taken into account when, measuring the success of their school, participation in the way that their, academics are proceeding. So definitely something to be cautious about or aware about. In the next slide, we have a map of the percentage of enrolled homeless students who scored at or above proficient reading. And if you look at the who at or above. So if you look at the map, you see states like Texas and Louisiana, Washington and Oregon that have 32% or more of students who are scoring at or above proficient reading. And then you have states like California and Wyoming and Idaho that are scoring in between 26% and 31%. But if you're looking at that number, 32% of students are scoring at or above proficient reading for the 2017-2018 school year for language arts. That means, if I'm doing my math correctly, 68% of students are not at or above proficiency. They are below. So that should be a very alarming number. And that is just for Texas and the states that are in purple. It's an even worse number for students that are living in the lightly less colored zones. So we should definitely be more cautious and aware with that. And to go into what is being done to help assist the homeless population in terms of laws and legislation, there is the McKinney-Vento Act, and I will be passing that on to a friend of mine and the next panelist, Alida Sanchez, who will go into talking about what the McKinney-Vento Act is.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dylan. I just want to really thank you for your story that you just shared with us.
Thank you.
Dylan, you gave us an opportunity to better understand the impact homelessness has for a student. You walked us through the statistics that were faced, and it's very important for McKinney-Vento district liaisons, my role, to have firsthand experience for students to be able to make the best decisions to implement the McKinney-Vento Act. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what the McKinney-Vento Act. The McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law that guides school districts on the rights and the protections for children and youth experiencing homelessness. So the McKinney-Vento Act provides the criteria and living arrangements that would be considered the situation of not being fixed, regular, or adequate or standard for us to be able to review that. So from the ages of 0 to 22, those that lack that dwelling, we would then qualify as McKinney-Vento students to support them. But before I go into more into detail what we're doing in our districts and what we can do based on this, the law and the guidelines that we have, we're going to have Sean go over school designs and trends that are very important to support students experiencing homelessness. Sean?
Thanks, Alida, and thank you, Dylan, for sharing your moving and powerful story. As a school designer, in this section, what we wanted to explore are some of the ways that districts and school designs are creating environments that support students and their families that are experiencing homelessness. In creating these responses to the needs of these students and their families, these schools that we'll share with you tonight and their affiliated partners have often gone beyond the conventional educational specifications or mission to create new activities, new spaces, and often new partnerships. You can see some of the issues and trends that we're seeing across the nation on the left side of the screen. Let's walk through some of these ideas. As we've been speaking with Dylan, one of the ways that we've been discussing that schools can support students experiencing homelessness is to expand the range of medical, mental health, and dental care, and to make that easily accessible from school. School-based health centers provide access to primary care services in schools. These clinics are uniquely designed to mitigate barriers for youth seeking adolescent-friendly healthcare environments. This clinic that we're seeing on the screen here at Roosevelt High School, actually you can see another image of the building just over my left shoulder here too, is one of 8 across the city that students can attend. This one's staffed by MedStar, a network of hospitals, and it's situated directly below this new entrance that we've added to an existing building. With this entrance, the clinic can operate independently of the school, serving children throughout the school year and around the school day as well, and on after hours and on weekends. And in many ways, these kinds of centers provide access to professional help that's not ordinarily accessible in the high school environment or any school environment. Again, access to doctors, dentists, therapists, and other counselors, that are brought in with the affiliation with the medical institution as a partner. Another aspect that Dylan underscored is the idea of food insecurity. And the National School Lunch Program is the nation's second largest food and nutrition assistance program after what's conventionally called food stamps. And in 2019, just to give you a sense of scale, this program operated in nearly 100,000 schools and residential child care institutions and served over 29 million children every day. So already, this program has, an incredible scale, serving an incredible need. But what we found over the past few months as we've moved into the pandemic, this study issued in May by Brookings, starts to illustrate that need, in fact, benchmarked against data in 2018, has grown dramatically over the months, from the beginning of the pandemic into May. So what we're finding again is, an even more urgent need to address this issue and perhaps a mandate for schools to continue to try and close the gaps in food insecurity. So to explore a couple of ways that schools are doing this, one such that we've found both here in Washington, D.C. and Massachusetts is to think about access to food around the school day. And here in Washington, there was a report that noted that losing access to free meals if students are not attending summer school or school-based programming can be one of the most challenging things for homeless children over the summer. But what we found with some of the schools that we're working with is that's also true after hours and over weekends as well. So with very modest environmental needs, one of these programs is called the Weekend Backpack Program in Cambridge and Somerville, Massachusetts. Like other districts, including Washington, they found that losing access to these free meals can be one of the most challenging issues, for families. So accordingly, Cambridge and Somerville, on Friday afternoons, they pack up the satchels that you see here, or backpacks, to provide 2 lunches, 2 breakfasts, milk, and fresh fruit, that'll sustain the students and their families, through the weekend. And these backpacks are, sort of discreetly provided up at the front entrance of the building, as you can see here. So any student, that feels that they need this sort of support can just simply grab one of the bags as they walk out the door. And what the schools are finding as an outcome is that students then return back to school ready to learn, in a much better state, healthier, well, more active and prepared the following week. Another way that we're finding schools, trying to address issues of food insecurity is to engage gardening, cooking, and nutritional education into their curriculum. And oftentimes this is occurring through partnerships as well. Food Prints here, for example, in Washington, DC runs both the garden and the food lab that you see pictured here. And I love this picture of this young boy with the lemon. I think it demonstrates the sort of excitement of even engaging issues and sort of the energy that young children bring to these ideas, because it's hands-on, it's active, it's experiential. It gets them excited about growing and preparing and enjoying fresh local foods. It brings science and math and social studies, into the program. But its larger goal of this relationship between schools and Food Prints is to improve health outcomes, of children and their families, and again, engage them into something that becomes a really lifelong learning opportunity. We're also seeing this relationship of food and education come together outside of schools too. This is a program called Martha's Table here in Washington, D.C., which was founded initially to address this issue of food insecurity and provide education and resources to families that need assistance with these issues. But over time, what they've done is realize that the more education that they had to do, they they perhaps even needed to bring that sort of educational umbrella of a school into their own facility that you see pictured here, a new building called the Commons. And by providing access to quality education for preschool children in this instance, again, they're able to bring together health and wellness, address family resources, and start these children off, on the best foot possible, through their entry point into a successful educational point and then on beyond as well. So just to talk a little bit about the resources that they have, of course, there are kitchens and places to engage families like you see in the upper left image here, but they provide 10 early childhood classrooms serving children, as young as 6 weeks to 4 years of age. So again, a program similar to schools, realizing that, there's a really tremendous unmet need, in our urban environments in particular, that, takes a broader array of agencies and organizations to address. And this idea of providing early childhood education and care is something that we're seeing school districts also embrace across the country. So it's an expansion of the conventional school program, again, returning back to address, children that, are as young as several weeks, as we're seeing in the prior example here. And we're seeing also programs that are targeted at, ensuring that children have the resources that they need to succeed, from that, very, young child age of, birth, in essence, all the way through 3rd grade as being sort of a fundamental period to get children started off. So this example is Barton Elementary School's EduCare campus in Long Beach, California. It's the first standalone center like this that's really intended to become a demonstration center for child development. And what EduCare does is it connects full day, year-round care for children, that might be experiencing poverty or homelessness or their families, and prepare them for future success, as they move again into the school environment. And so the services provided, of course, start to touch on, early literacy, early math literacy, but also again, nutrition and therapy and guidance and counseling for both the children and families. And another expansion that we're seeing of the conventional school program is before and after school programming. And in speaking with Dylan too, he spoke very eloquently about the need for mentoring. And one of my favorite examples of this is a program that's had the name of Harlem Return Baseball to Inner Cities, or HRBI, which you see illustrated here. And what this group did was realize that the community of East Harlem that they were working within, that really there were very limited resources for children in that community for after school activities while their families were working. The children, again, didn't have resources in the school, they didn't have resources in the community, they didn't have resources at home to engage them. So HRBI built this baseball field, it's called the Field of Dreams that you see here, in an abandoned lot, and started a baseball program. But it wasn't really about baseball. Baseball was a vehicle, again, to provide interaction and counseling and mentorship and guidance, for these students to ensure that, one, they had a productive, active way of spending the balance of their day, but really to instill, the resources and motivation to continue and succeed in school, and then go on and succeed in careers and higher education past that as well. But one of the things that's really interesting about this particular program too is that as they grew that program after school, they realized that they needed to extend their reach, into these children and their families' lives. And so they actually created their own school, which you see illustrated here as well. And as we searched, East Harlem for a site to help them build their school as it grew. If you can imagine that urban areas like East Harlem don't have a lot of opportunities for new school construction. So we actually found a corner of a super block of an existing public housing site that you see illustrated here. And that relationship with the public housing on that block inspired them to then again increase their engagement with the community by building 89 units of affordable housing too. So now we have a program that went from mentoring to school to actually now thinking about the dearth of affordable housing and this issue of homelessness and the challenge of people finding good places to live. Again, all sort of orbiting around the school program here as well. And that idea of housing came up in some of our research as well with respect to access to resources, both from where the children and their families were being situated and to get to work and also to schools. And you can see the quote off to the left, which starts to show that some of the motels and the hotels that Dylan was sharing that children and their families might be living within here in Washington, for example, might be off of the mass transit system. So they're spending resources on Ubers and Lyfts trying to go to work, go to school. And while schools don't often have this opportunity, we've had a number of different chances here in the district to site a new high school, for example, as you see in this graphic. And so when the district is making these decisions about where to site them, you can see that there's a metro station, just 2 blocks away from the front door of the site that was selected here. So thinking about the children that are coming across the district to arrive at this place, they can take the subway or the metro, as we call it here in Washington, and arrive there. And their fares on that system are fully subsidized by the district. So again, it's a no cost ability to access those resources. And then finally, one of the trends that we've been seeing for a number of years is this idea of community schools. And just to read something from a document that Pennsylvania's Lancaster County published, what they say is many of today's leaders in education, business, and community development are coming to realize that schools alone cannot prepare our youth for productive adulthood. It's evident that schools and communities should work closely with each other to meet their mutual goals. Schools can provide more support for students, families, and staff when they're an integral part of the community. On the other hand, agencies can make services more accessible to youth and families by linking with schools, and they can connect better and have an impact on hard-to-reach clients. Appropriate and effective collaboration and teaming are seen as key factors to community development, learning, and family self-sufficiency. So this kind of partnership can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. We've explored some like the school-based health centers, but we're also seeing that sometimes now with this modest provision of administrative space, we can bring other agencies into the school's facilities and and again expand the web of resources that are available to students and families that can avail themselves of the greater access and convenience of these resources. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aleva to share more about her district and also how some of the provisions for these students and their families are developing through the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Sean. I want to talk a little bit more about my district and just talk a little bit about the trends, things that we are, using, and highlight what we take into account when we hear stories such as Dylan, and then we see how the design of a school in partnerships with all the stakeholders play a role. So Santa Ana Unified School District has, I'm going to talk about last year's stats. And so last year we had about 46,654 students that makes us the 10th largest district in California. And from that population, a little bit under 6,000 were homeless students, 13% of our district. So as you could see, that's not too different from the national statistics. And we want to support all students so that they can have an active participation in life instruction, virtual learning, or a hybrid situation because of the current pandemic. I'll talk a little bit more about the dwellings. So we have students that are residing in sharing accommodations, usually doubled up, tripled up, or maybe even more. Sometimes families are forced to stay in a garage, or they're forced to stay in a shed because they don't have anywhere else to go. We also have motels and hotels. We have families that are in emergency shelters as well as domestic violence shelters. And that, as you could see, reflects the general statistics from our national organization. We have the majority of them doubled up and tripled up. But currently, we have lost enrollment. I think talking with other county representatives and other McKinney-Vento district liaisons, they have too experienced a drop in enrollment. And so we have lost about 667 students that were McKinney-Vento. And so we are actively searching. We develop a program called Family Finder so that we can see if not enrolled through CalPADS that would allow you to find if anybody else enrolled in another district. We want to know where they are. Additionally, we have about 219 students that are unaccompanied. As you can see in the red arrow, the older the student, the higher this rate is. And a lot of unaccompanied minors become homeless themselves. If they have a parent guardian, or if they are in some type of kinship, the likelihood of them not having proactive supports and networks is higher. So it becomes a critical focus. So that's something that's worth noting. Also, our graduation rate, as Dylan mentioned when he was talking about the statistics, we have as a district a graduation rate of 82%. Our program, our McKinney-Vento students experiencing homelessness, is 87%. We obviously want to aim for 100%. We're doing our best to be able to support them, and we try to put in initiatives and follow the guidelines of the McKinney-Vento Act to be able to ensure that students get their high school diploma, because that is, like Dylan said, a key to end the cycle of homelessness. Homelessness is one of those things that I want to talk about. There's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of stigmas with having a conversation of someone who is in an inadequate housing situation. So what I have encouraged our families right now when we're trying to figure out where they are is to ask them, since the pandemic started, has your dwelling or housing situation changed? Have you been impacted, and in what way? You know, we've had loss of jobs, and we have evictions. Even though there were some protections at the beginning, we have had more and more families that were renting a room inside a house forced out and now residing in abandoned buildings or storage units overnight and having to leave really early. Some of our kids have to do virtual learning from parks. And so it became very obvious that we had to implement strategies that were thinking outside the box and outside the McKinney-Vento law. So we have offer weekly case consults for our staff so that we can help them train on the criteria, what meets criteria for McKinney-Vento under special programs. And then how do we have an empathetic response, including on mental health social workers to support the needs of the students, immediately stabilizing the needs of the family. More identification of families and students increase our cross collaboration between departments, not only intra-district, but also inter-district. We are in a very unique situation where we're surrounded by other districts. And so one of the districts that we were able to collaborate with was Anaheim. Anaheim is another very, very high density school district. And so when it was very important to meet the nutritional needs of our kids, I would mention that some of our families were living in the city of Anaheim and they were allowed to pick up the meals from the other district. And so, or vice versa, we were able to help each other that way. Virtual environments also forces a faster response on the student needs. We're working from home and we're expected to be there to identify where the family is and how to meet their needs. In addition to the intra-district collaborations, we were providing information to families if they contracted COVID, where they can do COVID testing in other cities as well as Santa Ana. We worked with other departments to push out information of all the resources that we have, as well as the resources that other districts had, so that we didn't miss a student. I offer weekly virtual office hours for students and parents just to support collaboration. If a student can't connect for whatever reason, if they don't have the Chromebook or they don't have a Wi-Fi connectivity, then that's going to prevent them from acquiring instruction time. So we also printed packets and deliver them to shelters and motels, should that be the case, while we got the student a hotspot so that they can connect. Our motel outreach grew. We identified a lot more students that were temporarily staying in motels after they faced an eviction or after a family member was diagnosed with COVID and they had a quarantine. A little bit more about the immediate needs of our students. We were able to gather grocery cards, Target and Walmart cards, so that in the midst of the pandemic, if anybody had contracted COVID or were at risk, they can order things that they needed and have them delivered to where they were. In some instances, stuff was delivered to our campus, and then we would notify the parent, and we had drive-by distributions as well as walk-up, and we follow CDC guidelines to support the families. Food essentials, I mentioned before, nutritional services worked for us to deliver breakfast, lunch, and a snack to the motels and shelters, as well as high density sections within the city where we knew that there were high numbers in apartment complexes and they needed to be serviced. The weekly distribution list for families, we have, just like Sean mentioned, we have family centers at each school site. The wellness center allowed the families to contact for resources, and so all of the food distributions within the community were listed and published on our website. We would text pictures of the locations, and also if a family had any restrictions, we had our attendance team pick up some of the food items and deliver for families that were in critical situations. The medical needs, like I mentioned earlier, and then we had 2 hotlines to support our students and families. One was for mental health resources, and the other one was for tech assistance. So if they were unable to connect. Access to showers at the school in some extreme cases for our students. Childcare, as soon as it was safe following our governor's order, our extended learning prioritized homeless and foster students in a very limited setting. So the students would come in and they would watch not just from the extended period, which we had before and after school. The students would be dropped off early in the morning and picked up after work. So the families that were essential workers or were seeking employment could focus on that. We developed communities to keep students accountable to attend classes and support each other. And you'll be able to see that in our next picture, where if a family member was unable to work or they lost employment, they were in charge of having this table on the first picture that you can see, having this table out for all the kids to sit around and attend class, and they would become networks of support for each other. So if they struggled with connectivity, they were accountable and they were constantly saying, you have to do your work, you have to connect, because our attendance matter and we care about the students' academics. Additionally, we had vans with transportation that we normally use to transport our students that were in our special education to provide high, strong Wi-Fi for those the high density areas. A lot of our students had complained that even though if they had the hotspot, it was very difficult for them to connect to class, or the class would drop and it was just becoming a problem. So we were thinking about what would be the best way to help the students. We also did that for a motel where we have about 180 suites, and the vast majority of the families are students in there, as well as neighboring districts. And so there was no protection in the Wi-Fi, and it was for our students to be able to attend virtual learning. We distribute academic materials, like I had mentioned before, Chromebooks and headsets for students that lived with a large number of family members and they needed to focus. Tutoring partnerships for students residing in motels and shelters continued. We didn't want the students to fall behind academically, so we also offered tutoring from the school site for other students that were not on those dwellings. In some instances, schools realized that some of the accommodations were not safe or conducive for a virtual setting. So they opened the doors of the schools following the guidelines, and they were able to connect from either the parking lot, the gymnasium, or a classroom by themselves. We were able to identify students that meet the law for AB 1806 to get a credit waiver if they were graduating seniors. And of course, a lot of our seniors school got interrupted. And so what we did is, if they moved after 10th grade and they were close to finishing and they wanted to take advantage of the state requirements only versus the district requirements, they were able to do that as well. Backpacks and school supplies were available for all of our students, and uniform and laundry detergent. Not having clean clothes is one of the #1 reasons why students don't attend school. And so even within a virtual learning, I think it was important to make sure that the students had what they needed. We distributed over 800 bottles of detergent within 3 days. So the need was tremendous at our district. In addition to essential needs, we provided hygiene kits as well as sanitary products for our female students. I had mentioned laundry detergent and portable chargers for those students that were in their vehicles. We wanted for those students to be able to have an ability to call us or text us if they needed any support. We allowed students to come over to our sites to charge their Chromebooks and take them back if they didn't have any outlet connections. Inflatable beds were some of the requests, and undergarments as well. The picture that you can see here, we have a partnership with Giving Children Hope. In addition to filling backpacks with food, they have a Giving for Living program. And for our students that were residing in emergency shelters that qualified for vouchers, they were able to find an apartment for them. And so we didn't want them to spend their nights with no furniture. What we did is we contacted this organization that usually gets donations of items that are completely new. They're in great condition, and they would load them up. Our transportation department with the district provided the delivery of these items, and we worked with other nonprofits such as Project Kinship, and we deliver them so that the students had a desk area so that they can sit down and eat their meals while they're at the same time attending virtual classes. Additionally, with key stakeholders, other foundations donated over $35,000 to provide stipends for families that were affected by COVID in some high schools. So some of the families that reported losing their homes or not being able to pay rent, they received a $200 to $500 gift card so that they can get through the first months of COVID. I had already shared with you the Giving for Living program with Giving Children Hope with furniture and household items. Chick-fil-A also donated over 300 chicken sandwiches for our motels. The students that were residing in the motels and their staff would knock on their motel door and offer a meal. We also partnered up with other shelters and Macy's, and so clothing was one of the #1 request. A lot of our kids outgrow their clothes, and so with those donations we were able to support our students. You know, I want to be able to mention that in a traditional setting, we would be thinking about holidays. We would be thinking of how can we support our students? How can we make sure that they have a decent Thanksgiving? And so those are some of my fears, some of the reasons why I stay up at night thinking of not having enough to eat during the day, let alone being able to focus on celebrating Thanksgiving. And so in the past, along with Ty and a few other architects, we began a partnership where we provided a holiday for our Thai students. So it's transitional age youth, anywhere from 16 to 24. That tends to be like a forgotten population because elementary school age students are the focal point for toy drives. But a lot of our youth don't have the opportunity to feel safe and celebrate. And so we did a holiday party last year. And so this year we have to think outside the box of how we're going to bring a little bit of joy and comfort during this pandemic to our students. And so I think for our McKinney-Vento district liaisons, it has been tremendously hard to be able to remove all educational barriers. And I think that partnering up and following that community school model to fill in some of the needs would be the initial standpoint. And I've been trying my best to be able to listen to the stories and connect them with the right resources. So thank you so much for listening to just the role of a school district. And I really hope that we can engage the students in attending classes and fully participate in activities, even virtually or hybrid or, resuming when we do open our doors.
Thank you so much, Alita. So at this point of our discussion, I first want to say that I have learned so much over the last 2 years from Alita and her presentations, and this is not the first time that she's been in front of us here at A4LE. She came and did a very similar presentation with us last year, and I just want to say that not all heroes wear capes, and I think that's clear with everything that you are doing for your students. So if we were in a room full of, I don't know, let's hope 200 people, I don't know, I think you would receive a standing round of applause because I think you're doing a fantastic job. So thank you. Okay, so as we round off this discussion, putting on my best moderator's hat, and debate moderator's hat. I've written down some questions from today's presentation because I learned even more today sitting and listening to this. They don't know the questions yet. I promise they're not too hard. No one's seen these questions but me. So I will I'll kick it off with a question to Dylan. Dylan, through this process of making this presentation and sitting through last year's presentation, I've learned things like it's not homeless students, it's students experiencing homeless. And it's not the at-risk population, it's students with promise. Can you share a little bit about the stigma of homelessness and how it impacted you? And just, we've got our timer on the screen. If you can maybe spend about a minute and a half describing that. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
You got me. Sure, yes. I forgot I had muted myself, but I would definitely say that there is a huge stigma towards people who are homeless. I think the solution is just rethinking about the way we think students that are experiencing homelessness. And I think, Ty, you just said it earlier. It's not homeless students, it's students who are experiencing homelessness. I think there is a big perception and mindset that needs to change from how we think about students who are experiencing, such traumatic events. And if we can change our perception and the way that we are addressing the issue, then the way we're changing to address the issue will also see the change in the results. I definitely think it was very embarrassing at times, especially when other school, when other kids at school would see, us go home with bags of food. Sometimes they'd be like, "Well, why are you carrying food?" Well, because we can't afford food. Well, why can't you afford food? Kids ask questions, and it can be a pretty embarrassing thing. And showing up to school with really hold clothes and clothes that just didn't fit or weren't the right size, just definitely played into that perception. So I definitely think the change in addressing the situation and thinking of how we can change our perception about the situation, we'll see results in the way that we'll see change in the way that we see our results.
So that leads almost like you were reading my notes into my second question. And this one kind of goes to all three of you. Last year, Lita, we had a guest speaker that you brought with us, and she talked a lot about how embarrassing homelessness can be. And at the presentation last year, we had a long engagement about destigmatizing homelessness architecturally. And one of the discussion items that we had was sometimes the entrances for areas such as a food bank at the school can be too public. And the stigma of going into an area that is designated specifically for them to pick up that food to bring home to their family caused her at points to not go into that space. So a question for all three of you, and starting with Dylan, since you did experience this and you expressed some of that shame that it brought with you, could you express maybe how your school building could have been different to help prevent that embarrassment?
Sure. I definitely think just, being discreet about, the services that are being provided to the students, because especially students who are in middle school and high school, they really care about, their the image that they're projecting, right? They don't want people to think or have any clue about, stuff that may be going on at home. So I definitely think there needs to be, a site on campus where resources such as food can be handed out. But I think that the area in which that happens should be, a little bit more discreet. I think we can be more discreet about how we're passing out the food in, backpacks or bags, or, to make it a little less obvious. I think there needs to be a lot more thought and concern put into, how students may be feeling about coming towards an area that, may not fit their image that they want. And I definitely know, like, from experience, like, that a lot of kids feel embarrassed to go to these areas because if other people see them, they don't want that help. So I just think being discreet about where we're offering these services might be critical in understanding as well.
Yeah, and Alita, after last year's conversation and in hearing a little bit of that from Dylan, were there any changes that you all adopted last year? Might not have been able to implement them yet this year due to COVID, but how did that conversation continue after last year's conference?
So last year, the example that was provided was from a student outside our district. In our district, we have the wellness centers. And so those wellness centers usually have an exit towards the outside of the school. So nobody has to go inside through the inside of the school to then come back around. Because the need for our families is so tremendous, we have also been able to implement like a support for all of our students. So this is not going to single out any of the students. Everybody will take something home. Giving Children Hope is fantastic at doing what they do. That's why they have the backpack program. So there's no visible shopping items or food being carried out. They wear a backpack. It's also the extended times, right? The before and after school that would give a parent the ability to pick up the items versus giving it to a student. I think because I come from a social work background, I'm a social worker. I think that one of the ways that you can deal with the stigma is also spreading empathy and acknowledging that we have a problem as a society, and how, sometimes students will surprise
I
you.
agree.
They are the ones that would take that negative connotation away from something. Um, those students that are going through something embarrassing and vulnerable would be more empowered if their peer is there with them. So for instance, when we had our holiday party, I not just segregated the population. I didn't invite just students that were experiencing homelessness or students that were in the foster system. I said, hey, come over and bring a friend. And so we tend to do things or do better when we have a partner on our side. So it's an opportunity for us to change the perspective at the same time.
So Sean, a follow-up on that about the stigma and some of the architectural solutions that you presented to us. In our role as the design professionals, sometimes, well, actually every time, we run up against budget. And oftentimes at the highest levels of the decision-making tree, people realize that this is there, but there's not often enough budget added to solve the problem. So how do we as professionals in our part of the industry encourage our clients to really dedicate the resources to something as simple as a wash machine, or as simple as 2 entrances to a space? How do we break through that conversation?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Ty. And to just reflect upon what Dylan and Alida just said, we've heard, a lot of those issues, about entry and, and privacy, and the buildings that we've designed, that provide some of these services. So we've certainly would echo, some of the things that I've heard. But I'm also curious, about some programs, when there are boys and girls clubs, or programs like HRBI, they're not exclusively for the children that are experiencing homelessness. They're for everybody, and in some ways, that becomes, I think, a way of bringing everybody together and building community, through some of these programs too, perhaps. But I think what we're seeing right now, and it may be an illustration of the economic circumstance that we're in. But I'm seeing, for example, on the affordable housing front, a lot of more talk about bringing affordable housing in schools together, and boys and girls clubs and other programs, into the sort of orbit, around here. And I think in some ways it's being driven by the lack of resources there, or even public libraries, coming together with schools. So I think what we can realize from those conversations is that everybody recognizes that there's a lack of resources, and we all certainly hope for more funding for these programs, but that through collaboration, we can actually achieve, the sort of conjoined goals, of these organizations and these agencies and these entities, that can come together, whether it's a health clinic, or or Boys and Girls Club, coming, and sharing school facilities. Sooner or later, a gym is a gym, for example, for an after school program that might not ordinarily be doing anything, on the weekends or after hours. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly, but I think it's really a conversation about, greatest value for, the public's investment in school facilities, and how we make sure that, every student, has the opportunities to achieve successfully, and that we're providing appropriate resources, through these collaborations.
I think you're right on with your assessment and with your answer. I really think this is a community solution, and there's a way to have the school return to that central hub that really provides everything for that neighborhood, and being collaborative with the libraries and the clinics and all of the examples that you gave today. I think talking to the educators and those leaders at the top that really make these decisions and showing that value is going to advance this. So as we close out the discussion, Alita talked about our opportunity that we had last year to provide that party for those students. I learned a lot from that event, such as oftentimes the gifts that were provided, the students weren't taking them for themselves, they were taking them for their parents, or they were taking them for their grandparents, or, oh, I really think my brother could use this. I heard that story as well. So we have posted on the screen a GoFundMe so that we can do the second annual event for those students. And I really appreciate everybody's attention today and joining us. I hope that you'll take this back to your schools and to your educators and to your offices and help spread the awareness of this issue. Thank you so much to everybody, and thank you to Dylan and Sean and Alita for helping us with this presentation today.
Thank you, Ty.
Thank you.
Thank you.